Professor Maren Lytje
Sure.
from the Department of Education at the University College of Northern Denmark. It's a pleasure to meet you virtually.
Yes.
I know that you are not used to using titles in Denmark so much, but still, just in order to introduce you. So you are our expert in what happened during COVID-19, actually, in Denmark, in the education system. Could you tell us a little bit about COVID-19 in Denmark in general? What happened? What were the main challenges for the education system? And just generally, how did they cope? What did they actually do?
I mean, I think the challenges here were the same as everywhere else. I mean, the lockdown happened fairly quickly. It seemed it happened from one day to the next. So what the Danish government did was they gave the school sort of a 2-day notice up to the weekend to and the parents were also given the same 2 days notice before they had to take their children home. So the lockdown came on a Thursday, and then the children were, or the parents were encouraged to keep the children at home for those 2 days, but they could go to school if they needed to. And then, of course, came the weekend, the Saturday and Sunday. So that gave the school sort of 4 days total to try to reorganize, and it gave the parents, about 4 days to reorganize their lives. So there wasn't much time, but I could understand that in Israel, it was even a shorter time. So I guess it's marginally better here. In terms of, in terms of the challenges for the schools, I mean, they were the same as everywhere else. I mean, first of all, how to teach the children. I mean, they started by introducing this notion of emergency teaching, just to send a signal to the parents that they couldn't expect a full school day, and that they couldn't expect the same level of education as they would normally have. And I think that was quite important to send that signal, actually, to say that this is a special situation, and you shouldn't expect it to be the same. So hence the notion of emergency teaching, which actually they kept in place even after the school opened again. I mean, the challenges, I think, for the schools mostly had to do with how to organize the teaching, because there were, I mean, the different ways of handling it. And initially, I mean, a lot of the schools, they took recourse to a form that the students already knew from school. I mean, Denmark has all schools in Denmark, at least the public schools, they have learning platforms. So it means there is a high level of digitalization already in place in the schools, and the pupils are used to learning through digital forms. So, for example, they used to, in the school, they have learning platforms, and when the teaching starts, the teacher might introduce a topic, and then the students are used to going to that digital platform to find the materials and, for example, find the questions they need to work with, or find the videos they need to watch. So I think that a lot of the teachers, in the days, in the days after the schools closed down, they referred to that form, which the students already knew. So the students, for example, I mean, they would go to the platform, they would be told, for example, now today you have 6 lessons, 2 lessons of Danish, 2 lessons of math, 2 lessons of history, and you need to go to this platform and you need to find the material and do what you're told, basically. And I think, I mean, for the well-functioning students, that worked very nicely, and they were used to working like that, so that didn't cause too many problems. I think, of course, for the students who were less I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but I mean for students who struggle more with with the academic level, it was much more difficult, of course, because they didn't have the help of teachers, and often they didn't have the help of parents either. So I think for students, for the students as they are most, which means most students are after all fairly well functioning and autonomous. I think they handled the lockdown fine, actually, but you still had that, I don't know, I mean, I'm guessing now 15-20% perhaps who would probably be struggling with this form. But I think that's what most schools did initially. And then, I mean, in Denmark, schools have a fairly high degree of autonomy, so they weren't told by the Ministry of Education that they should do one thing or the other. So the schools organized the teaching basically during the lockdown, and so it also means that teaching varied from school to school, and I simply don't have insights into all the different forms that the schools chose, but I know the digital platform played a very, very important role during lockdown in all schools. And then as time went by, I mean, no one knew when the schools were going to open again, and as time went by, a lot of the schools started introducing online teaching, simply to make sure that the students, I mean, not only to make sure that the students were actually there, so to speak, and doing something, but I think also, I mean, I think it was quite important for the students to feel like there was still a school, there were still other students, there was still a teacher. So I mean, I think a lot of the schools then had online teaching, and they used, I mean, many different. They actually used many different tools. I mean, I know some used Zoom, others used Google Meet. So that varied quite a bit.
When you talk about online teaching, what exactly do you mean? They met the whole class, or
yeah, they met. Yeah, I mean, it often, I mean, it could be they met the whole class. So everyone had to, so everyone had to be there. And I know what a lot of the schools did was, they met the whole class met, and the teacher chatted a bit with them, and sometimes it was as simple. I mean, it was almost like a touch base thing, to say I am still here, and then ask each individual student, how are you doing? And I think that was quite important, actually. And then the teacher would, in this online form, it could be on Google Meet, and all the students would be there. And sometimes, I mean, I know some schools required them to turn their cameras on too, right? And others didn't.
So that happened once a day or once a week, or how?
Varied massively. I mean, when the lockdown had lasted for about 2 weeks, I think. Many schools started doing it once a day. And especially after, I mean, in Denmark, the younger children went back to school before the older children. And when the schools opened again for the younger classes, then many schools introduced that compulsory online teaching for the older classes as well. But I mean, it varied a bit. I mean, it could be every day for some schools, every other day for other schools. But I mean, I know the schools in Aalborg, where we're located. Most of them, after a period of time, they offered online teaching every day. But I mean, it varied a bit how much time. Usually, it would be from 8 till 2 would be quite common. They also use these outbreak groups quite a lot. I mean, so the teacher would organize the students into groups, and then they would be grouped in sort of little online groups and do the group work together. And of course, I mean, with students who are well functioning groups, that work very nicely. And if they're not well functioning groups, they're a bit lost there too, right? But But what the teacher would then do is he or she would go from group to group then, right? I mean, virtually go from group to group to see how they were doing. So that was, I mean, I think after roughly 2 weeks of lockdown, that was the common form by then. So it changed, right? I mean, as time went by, and it became quite clear that no one knew when the schools were going to open again.
You talked a little bit about students who were struggling. Could you say a few words about disadvantaged populations, or how would their situation handled? Education?
Well, I mean, again, it varied a bit from school to school. I mean, so I mean, the best I can do is give concrete examples. For example, the school that we collaborate with, which is located close to us and has a high immigrant population, children from immigrant families, they had organized for the children to come in one by one, actually, to talk to a teacher for half an hour, not necessarily every day, but at least a couple of times a week. And I know of another school also here in Aalborg who had the same arrangement. I mean, they don't have many students from immigrant families, but they have, with students who came from disadvantaged families. They had them either come in or they had an arrangement where the teacher called them every day. Right? So there was one teacher who was sort of put in charge of those children, and they were supposed to then call them at least once a day, and perhaps also call their parents and ask, how are things going, and do they need anything? Do they need any kind of help? So I think that was quite a common way of handling it. I mean, often the teachers know who the disadvantaged students are, and then they make a list basically of who are they, and then they distribute them between the teachers who are then in charge of making contact, taking contact. I think that was quite a common approach. But I mean, it's no secret that, I mean, disadvantaged children were more disadvantaged in the setting than they would have been otherwise. And that especially applies to children who come from, violent homes, homes with alcohol problems or drug problems. And who benefit a lot from actually just getting out of the house. They obviously suffered quite a bit from the lockdown.
Okay, so you were talking about a few things, also concrete, practical things that helped, but also about the sense of autonomy, the personal responsibility of the teachers, and also the feeling that they can pretty much do whatever is needed in accordance with the specific circumstances. Do you have any thoughts about kind of more general thoughts about the main qualities or strengths that helped people, teachers and educators make best use of the opportunities of the uncertainty?
I think in a situation like this, I mean, you mentioned autonomy. I think I've said it a couple of, probably many times by now. I think that is one very, very important quality to have in a situation like this, because the teachers need to make decisions autonomously. They need to be able to evaluate the situation and rely on their own judgment, rather than the judgment of someone who sits hundreds of kilometers away and don't know what is going on. I think, if you look at the students, for example, I think the fact that not all students, but many students are, or at least the teachers try to teach them personal responsibility for their own learning. And I think there was an important quality here as well. Those students who master that clearly did much better out of this situation. And I'm guessing now, but probably as well as they would have otherwise academically would be my guess. So I think if you have an educational system that fosters responsibility for own learning, personal responsibility, especially also I think emotional autonomy, the ability to handle emotions as well, I think is quite important in a situation like this, especially for the students. And I think that teachers and especially children who had those qualities, mastered them somehow, probably handle the situation better than others. I mean, because one thing is to ensure the students' academic level and ensure that they learn something during this period. I mean, but another thing is to handle the emotional stress of being separated, right? And only being at home and not seeing your friends and not have a social network. And I think, I think children who, who were able to take advantage actually also of digital technologies to hang out with others, for example, they did much better in this situation than they otherwise would have. So I think in terms of abstract concepts, autonomy, personal responsibility for own learning, I think were quite important here for handling a situation like this.
So I have just one more question now, and maybe another one later, but because you haven't talked about it a lot in Denmark, something that Denmark is unique at. But can you, so this is not unique to Denmark, but can you think of it, you have talked about the coping and how to handle the difficulties, but can you think of any benefits that may have raised from the situation?
I'm tempted to say no, because I think everyone would have been better off without this situation, clearly. And so in that sense, I think if you talk about benefits from the situation, I mean, you have to force them a bit, right? So I'm sorry, but I'm really tempted to say no. No.
But I should rephrase. This situation was inevitable.
Yeah, at least it happened, right? I mean, so
yes.
You had to deal with it, yes.
Yes, but noting that you did.
Yes, what can we learn from it?
Yeah.
Can we learn anything from it? Yes. I mean, now I'm speaking specifically about the Danish school system and the Danish case, and I don't know if this applies generally at all. One thing I think that we learned from it, and these are actually important lessons, I think, which there should be political action in relation to. In 2013, Denmark introduced a school reform which made the school days much longer, which overloaded the teachers in terms of teaching hours and preparation, and which introduced extra lessons for Danish and mathematics, among other things. So the school days have become, for Danish standards at least, quite long. And the classes have become larger because there's more pressure on the teacher. So basically you expanded the number of hours they had to teach without actually expanding the teaching staff. And I think two important lessons were, one, the school days simply do not need to be that long. I mean, children, again, we're talking about the, let's say, normal, well-functioning children here, learned as much within the span of 5 or 6 lessons as they do within the span of 7 or 8 lessons. That is one very important lesson to learn, I think. And another equally important lesson to learn is that when the schools opened again for the younger classes, they had to work under restrictions like everyone else, which means they had to work with in smaller groups. So typically, a class of, let's say a class of 20 would be divided into 2. So there would be 10 in each class. Perhaps that group again would be divided into 2 groups. So there were 5 children in each, and there was 1 teacher attached to that group. And that clearly benefited especially children who were somehow, not necessarily disadvantaged, but who were somehow either struggling, either socially or academically in school. That benefited them tremendously. And I think that is a very, very important lesson to learn as well here, which is that it's better to have let's say, to exchange the long school days for work in much smaller groups, because that's clearly very beneficial to, to everyone, but especially to children who struggle, with with social contacts, or who struggle academically. So they were not. I'm not sure I wouldn't call them benefits, but I think they were important lessons actually. And it was clear in that brief period where the schools were only partially opened, they were very good for a lot of children actually. So smaller classes, smaller groups, I think, is something that you could learn from this.
Okay, these are important lessons, I think. Maybe talking also saying something about the quality.
Yeah, quality rather than quantity, right? I think that's also, in a way it's common sense, right? And I don't know why we need this to learn that lesson, but apparently we do.
Okay, so this was very helpful for us, I think, very illuminating. Any other things that are important for you to say?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think we have covered many things by now.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing from my experience in Denmark. I think there's a relatively high level of trust here. And I think this trust is needed in order to give autonomy to someone else. Because when you give them autonomy, you say, you're responsible and we trust that you will do the right thing. And I think that is something that the system here has really benefited from in this.
Yeah, I think you're probably, you're probably right. Generally with the lockdown situation, what's funny about Denmark is that everyone basically did what they were told, or at least 9 out of 10 did what they were told. And I think you're right about the trust. That shows something about the trust of, the trust in authorities almost, right? Not in authorities, but the trust in the government at least, right? That of course, the government will do what is to our benefit, and we do what we're told, right? For the benefit of the collective. So that's probably true, trust. Yeah.
But I think also I'm in the other way. So the government, like the Ministry of Education in our case, trusted the teachers in the schools that they would do what they need to do and what they ought to do, even without having very specific instructions about what has to be done. So this enabled them to make the adjustments that were needed.
Yeah, but that system was already in place, right? And I think that it was important too, that there was already a system in place like that, right? With a fairly high degree of autonomy for schools.
Yeah. Dear Maren, thank you so much.
Is that it?
I guess.
Great.